Did you make it back in this short a time?
No, he handed the keys to me and kept driving, and I still made it here faster.
I was going to say.
That's how I drive.
And say, how come you're here and he's not?
That's right.
He drove by and literally with the keys like this, and I grabbed them, and now he's on his way. I don't know what happened to him.
Well, we'll wait for him.
He doesn't drive as fast as I do. Nobody does. Hi all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I had a fun drive-in this morning, wide
Oh, you
open on
kidding?
the 101, wide open.
Whoa.
90 halfway here.
Wow.
I don't get a chance to
Nice.
drive fast very often.
Yeah, I know, there's no place to really
I left Santa Monica at 5 to 5 p.m. on Friday, and it was glorious.
Really?
I didn't think there'd be much traffic. I'd be checking Waze, and I flew the whole way down to San Clemente.
So where did you go?
San Clemente, I stayed there for the evening,
Oh, okay.
and then drove from San Clemente to Rancho Santa Fe for the workshop.
And there was no one on Black Friday for at 5?
Yeah, because they're
5
on the
plus
stores.
5.
So,
Well, I figured, I forgot about Black Friday. I figured everyone had sort of, shot their bolt on Thursday night. With Thanksgiving, we're just spending Friday night moving. But I forgot about Black Friday. So maybe they were in stores. I don't know. All I know is that.
I don't know. Well, actually, Thursday night I dropped Drake off at the airport at 10 o'clock, like he was taking a flight. It's a whole other story. But I got there in like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he called me 10 minutes after I dropped him off and said, I've already been through security and check. I'm sitting and waiting. I'm an hour and a half early. It's like, why
Yeah.
is no one in LAX?
No one's flying on Thanksgiving night.
Yeah, that's
the date of
that's
flight. That's
It's like a
the
mate of
date.
mine. He flies on the 25th.
Who does?
A friend of guy I know. He likes flying on the
Is
25th.
there no one there? Beautiful. Beautiful way to travel. It's like reminiscent of, being a kid. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the way travel's supposed to be.
Saturday going up there, 4.5 hours. It's a 2-hour trip
Up to Leo Carrillo?
up to El
that what you
Capitan.
Oh, El Capitan.
You're right.
Wow.
That's from
Wait, when did
La
you go?
Cañada.
What day?
Saturday I left at noon.
Oh, it was Saturday?
From
Was
La
that busy?
Cañada all the way to where I take the 126 at Magic Mountain, 5 miles an hour the whole way. I don't know was it just people going home? I didn't see
Yeah,
any
probably.
accidents.
Wow.
There's people going home.
Wow.
Don't travel on the Saturday
I
after
don't
Thanksgiving.
know.
Yeah.
It's like such a crapshoot.
Yeah, it kind of is. Everyone's got their system, and I'm sure no one system really works.
No.
Mine does.
we all just remember the times when the traffic was great,
Yeah, we do.
and forget the times where we lost it.
Remember that time in 87 where
The system is sound. The system works.
the system.
They have just synced all the lights on Foothill Boulevard from Pasadena to Monrovia to when it dead ends at the mountain. And if you catch it at the beginning, you can do a green the whole way.
Wow.
It's like almost 10 miles.
It
That's
sounds like
awesome.
a challenge.
Yeah.
Right, on to more mundane affairs. Let's start. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavadidhamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti. Okay. So we are on page 145. Getting close to the home stretch. Well, not really.
Not really. Those ones.
Yeah, especially since there'll be no classes in December. So, we are in this section called the negative trait. Any questions before we pick up the text? All right, so the negative trait that he was talking about in this last section is the two motivations that we have as human beings. So we are constantly looking to acquire and enjoy. So there's one of these texts, I think we touched on it last time, Bhajagovindam. It's 31 verses of poetry, written in 800 or thereabouts, and it uses these two motivations as its theme throughout the entire text. It talks about wealth and woman. The word it actually uses is for gold, so I think it's gold and woman. So it uses these two things as symbols for the desire to acquire, to aggrandize, which is wealth or gold, and to enjoy, which is symbolized by woman. So these are the two motivations which drive us through life. So it's an interesting little exercise just to go through sort of a review of the past and the activities that we've done, what we've done and why we've done it. Yeah, we've always got a justification for the activity that we're performing. I'm doing it because. You know. But by and large, we can always trace it back to one of these two broad motivations. We're looking to acquire something so that we can possess it. He uses this phrase, dukkha nivritti, which means a safeguard against future sorrow. So we want to acquire something and possess it, so there'd be no sorrow in the future. And once we've got that thing, we want to actually contact it, engage with it, and enjoy it. So this is what's driving us. And the reason he calls this a negative trait, and again, going back to this text, the name of the text, Bhajagovindam, in I think it's the second verse, he says, "O fool, give up your thirst for aggrandizing wealth." So he doesn't say give up wealth, he doesn't say give up aggrandizing wealth. He says give up your thirst. So this is where the whole idea has been misconstrued. So what these texts often do is that they highlight the danger associated with indiscriminately looking to acquire and enjoy. Because there is a danger. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread. But this highlighting of the danger of these two motivations is wrongly construed as acquisition and enjoyment per se are wrong. Right? And this is how the text has been wrongly understood. And so as a result, people say, well, they either say to others or they say to themselves that I'm going to give that up. I'm going to give up worldly possessions. I'm going to give up the enjoyment of family and marriage and children and all these other sorts of things. So this is just a suppression of our natural urges. It's natural for us to succeed in our field of endeavour, to gain more, to progress. It's natural for us to contact the objects of the senses and enjoy them. The world is there for that. We're part of the world, we should enjoy it. So there's nothing wrong with the acquisition and enjoyment per se, it's when the desire is unmanaged. And when that happens, we find a range of negative effects. We talked about neutralization, indiscriminate contact of anything causes neutralization. This is a big topic of discussion yesterday. We used the example of mangoes, but of course, from a more practical perspective, you become neutralized to your partner, you become neutralized to your kids, the other human being that you live your life with, you become neutralized to them. And when it comes to acquisition, which is, I think we were discussing last week, maybe, we were talking about choking. I don't know if it was here or another class, but I recently gave the example of Greg Norman, who had apparently an unassailable lead going into the final day of the Masters, and that desire to acquire the title, to win the match, to win the tournament. If it's not managed properly, the mind gets agitated, the intellect can't think, we can't perform the activity that we're naturally good at. We've got a natural... Greg Norman's I presume, a natural sportsman. He's a natural golfer. You don't get to that level without having some natural ability. He can't even allow his natural vasanas, his own nature, to function. All he's got to do is do nothing. That's all he's got to do. And his nature takes care of itself. It functions. But he gets in the way of it with that grasping, that thirsting, that craving for the result. That's what gets in the way. That's the negative trait. Not only that, but the more we allow our desires to run for something, when they're not controlled, the desire increases. I used to do a little, but the little wouldn't do it, and so the little got more and more. In fact, somebody asked this yesterday, how do you know if you're properly moderating and regulating, your contacts and your desires and your expression and everything? And this is one of the ways you can understand it, is that when the desire is indiscriminately functioning, it increases. So the demand continues to grow. You want more and more of the same thing, or you want the same thing in a more intense experience. You have to sort of hang sort of different accoutrements and other embellishments off the experience to make it more interesting and more exciting, because boring now. What else can I do? I've got to intensify it somehow to get the same degree of enjoyment. So it grows as well. It gets to a point where it grows beyond what we can naturally satisfy. We've become dependent upon it, and so misery the whole way through. This is what he's talking about. So what does he say in the paragraph that we covered last time we finished with? He says, the heat of passions gushing out blows the cap of the intellect, destroys peace and harmony, forms revulsive attachment and possessiveness, ruining the magnificence of human life. It's a great sort of line. That elsewhere in the VT he talks about this, that human life is quote unquote designed to be heaven on earth. That's what's possible for us. But because of this indiscriminate running of the mind, it's turned into hell, ruining the magnificence of human life. Okay, so he continues. On 145 he says, fundamentally, you cannot find peace and happiness unless you renounce the self-asserting ego and egocentric desires, unless you drop the idea of I and my, me and mine. Edward Carpenter, an Englishman of spiritual experience, asserts, never before could I have believed it, but I see it all now. There is no happiness unless you have clean dropped thinking about yourself, but you must not do it by halves. While even there is a least grain of self left, it will spoil it all. You must just leave it all behind and vouchsafe the personality and mind that much sympathy as to any stranger, no more, no less. Hence must you set aside your corroding ego and banish your egocentric attachment and desires. Do not let the massive selfishness around and about you influence your personality. Get off the deadly hook of selfishness and learn to serve, sacrifice for the community at large. You would need to develop a strong intellect to combat and destroy the ego and its devastating tentacles. So there's a whole bunch of analogies in here. Right, so he has this quote. He brings this quote in the Vedanta treatise. So what he's saying here is that the ego is the barrier to the thing that we are searching for with all of our activities. Everything we do is for that sense of satisfaction, well-being, liberation, freedom. Every time we execute an action, we're doing it to achieve a change in the subjective state, a change in the way that we experience ourselves in our life. I'm hungry. This is unpleasant. So I'll make an action of eating to change it. I'm lonely, so I get married. I'm still lonely, so I have kids. I feel like I lack knowledge, so I try to gain knowledge. I feel like I lack autonomy, so I need a career. I feel like I lack recognition, so etc. Everything we have, we're in a state that is not quite right. And so we execute an action to change our state so that there's an internal change. This is what we're looking for. And presumably we have this belief that the change will make our internal state better. And sometimes it works, but generally what we say is that it's temporary. There's a desire for something. The desire is a form of mental agitation. I satisfy the desire, and there is that cessation of all of those mental agitations. And so there is a beautiful temporary state of mental peace. Cigarette, 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 cigarette. Mental peace. But of course it comes back again, so this is temporary. So when we talk about genuine mental peace, we talk about true happiness. We're talking about, in the same way that we talk about true love. What is true love?
Selflessness.
Mm-hmm. How do you know that the love you hold is true?
You're not craving. You don't need anything.
You don't need anything? Yeah, this is one way to put it.
It doesn't change based on the other person's behavior.
It doesn't change, yep. What does he say? Love is not love, the tempest tossed, and all that one, that whole sonnet. I don't remember which one it is, but it's in there. It's a good one because it's a good definition. He's basically saying in that sonnet that if it can change, it's not love. So we talk about true love as being unconditional. You know, this is years and years ago. It was either an interview I was watching or reading or something, I can't remember. It was an interview with a mother who had, whose son had been convicted of a murder. And I'm paraphrasing, but she basically said, he's my son, I love him still. And she's of course hurting because of what he's going through and what he's done, but the love hasn't changed. So that's unconditional. It's not conditional upon what the person does, how they function, whether they agree with you or not, and so on and so forth. So true love is independent of external circumstances. It does not change when the circumstances around us change. So take that analogy. What is true happiness? In the exact same way. It doesn't change when external circumstances change. Whereas the happiness that we are familiar with is the exact opposite. It's dependent upon external circumstances. When I get that, I will be satisfied. So what it means is that that degree of satisfaction is dependent upon those circumstances being that particular way. So what he's talking about here is peace and happiness that arises because of the absence of ego. So he describes the ego as the barrier to our peace and happiness. So the ego expresses as egocentric desires. So anytime there is a desire set up in the personality, it's as we're discussing, it's that mental agitation. It's the thing that I want, I want, I want. The desire is satisfied temporarily and then comes back again. Go back to the example of smoking. There's two ways that I can gain the satisfaction that a smoker gets. One is to actually smoke the cigarette, which satisfies the desire, sends it back to its dormant state temporarily. The other is uproot the desire per se. If the desire is gone, then the presence of those mental agitations has been banished. And so to that degree, the mental agitations in the mind have ceased. So it's for one desire. So what he's saying here is, if we could uproot every single desire from the personality, then we achieve that state that the smoker has for every object. You don't need anything, you have no wants. So what that means is that it doesn't matter what the world does, I'm still in love with it. If you want to sort of try and smash those two analogies together. Everything is exactly the way it should be, which is exactly how we feel the moment we've satisfied a strong desire. Everything's perfect. Nothing needs to change.
Use the word uproot. When you talk about uprooting everything, I have this image of this, just like a garden of weeds.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to get it. It's endless.
Yeah. This is what, and VT says this, he alludes to this. He says, plenty of imperfections in the personality. Get rid of one, another rises to the surface. Get rid of that one. Another rises to the surface. Just keep going. So this is brings in again this idea of result orientation. We can work on our desires and eradicating our desires with the desire to be self-realized, which is fine. That desire has to be there. But if we do it with result orientation, we're never going to get there. This is why in one of the verses in the Gita, he says renunciation is higher than meditation. Now, what we've understood normally is that first of all, you practice the 3 yogas, achieve a state of renunciation. When you've got there, then you meditate, then you realize. So the 3 yogas precedes renunciation, renunciation precedes meditation, meditation precedes the final goal. But here he's saying renunciation is better than meditation. Seems contradictory. What he's saying is that even when we are meditating, you have to not crave for the goal of meditation. What's the goal of meditation? Enlightenment. So while we are working on our personalities to eradicate ego and egocentric desires, no result orientation. So this idea of it's endless. So if you've got a garden, you never actually think one day there's going to be no weeds. The weeds will be here longer than I am. Know what to do? Well, get up and weed. You weed the garden every day or once a week, whatever it is. Without the result orientation, without that thought, one day there'll be no weeds. I mean, you can get Roundup and spray the whole thing and kill the entire ecosystem, I suppose, but that's taken outside the scope. You keep on weeding. You never have that thought, one day. If I just weed enough, there'll be no weeds left. Now, that analogy falls short of the reality here, because this is what we're saying here is that you can actually achieve the state of weedlessness.
Weed's going to be legal in a month here, so.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's true. Not in California. In California, it'd be weedful. So, understanding this is why he says, you cannot find peace and happiness unless you renounce the self-asserting ego. So what we're looking for, as we were saying, is that sense of liberation. The ego is that which constrains us. The ego limits us. The ego is a prescribed or defined definition of who and what we are. Again, we come back to this often. Somebody says, "Who are you?" And you give an answer based on the properties and qualities of your physical body, the properties and qualities of your mind and your intellect. I'm a male. Well, the genetic code is XY. The physiology is what it is. That's male. I'm a New Zealander. Well, the mind identifies with the nation of New Zealand. If I hear a Kiwi in a store, I go, you're a Kiwi, I can hear you. Where are you from? That doesn't happen when I hear an Australian or a Brit or a South African or an Irishman. Nothing happens. But when I hear a Kiwi, my mind naturally goes, there's that camaraderie. So I'm talking about my mind. When I say I'm a New Zealander, that's my mind. I'm a student of philosophy. I'm a spiritual seeker. This is my intellect. So I'm defining myself based on body, mind, and intellect when I answer the question, who am I? That's the ego. So the ego is the identification of myself as or with the functions of the body, mind, and intellect. So it's a limitation, it's a constraint. And that is the exact opposite of what we're searching for. Everything we're doing is to expand into a greater sense of freedom. Whether it's as mundane as eating a meal, because we feel constrained by hunger, we want to be free from that experience. We want to be free from every experience, and the proof of that is that we act to change our experience. If we weren't acting to change our experience, then we wouldn't be trying to get free from it. And so this is what the self-realized soul is like. The self-realized soul does not act to change his or her immediate present experience. There's no demands. Everything is as it is. Doesn't need to be changed. So there's no internal compulsion or propulsion to perform any action whatsoever, because they are in that permanent state of everything is just fine. I mean, to put it glibly. And they put it in much more grandiose terms, you know, an ocean of consciousness and unbroken peace and bliss and all the rest of it. But fundamentally, it's that there's a permanent acceptance of things as they are. One of the ways that we can describe suffering is that disparity, that gap between the way things are and the way we demand them to be. That's suffering. The inability to have to accept that, the present moment. I want. Who wants it? It's the ego. That's the ego. It's the I, the little I. I mean, we always capitalize it in language, but it really should be a little I. It'd make more sense. So he says, clean drop thinking about yourself. Okay, so there's a great line here. He says, you must just leave it all behind and vouchsafe the personality and mind that much sympathy as to any stranger, no more, no less. So you can think about this in terms of obligations. When you look at a stranger, there's no personal connection. There's no personal relationship with that stranger. Now, if that stranger happened to be standing on a street corner with a backpack and a map and a confused look on his face, you recognise, tourist, he's lost. Let's see if he needs help. What are you looking for? Museum. Okay, you might recognise that's your obligation. It's just something that you do, right? The guy on the road with you is a complete stranger. You have obligations towards him, and you perform those obligations. Right? I'm going to switch lanes, so indicate, whatever. You sort of get this idea. So it's when there's a stranger, because we have no personal relationship, we understand our obligations and we just discharge them. He says, look at your own physical body as you would another's physical body. What obligations do you have to your own physical body? Look at your mind. Look at your intellect. What obligations do these equipments have? Look at your car. What is a car? Well, it's the vehicle that takes me from environment to environment. Home to class, class to lunch, lunch to work, work home. It's the vehicle that takes me from environment to environment so I can have the required experience in that environment. Here I have the experience of class, there I have the experience of lunch, there I have the experience of work, etc. What is the body? It's a vehicle which takes me from environment to environment so that my inner personality, the driver, can have the experience that the inner personality demands. So now what are your obligations when it comes to your car? Keep it in good condition, get it serviced once every 5,000 miles, check the tyres and the pressure and so on and so forth. Keep it relatively clean, clear the rubbish out occasionally. Right, and you do that with complete dispassion. Okay. Some people love their cars a little too much. In fact, that's a great analogy because some people love their bodies a little too much. But you can imagine someone who treats their car with complete dispassion and simply performs the obligations that the car demands. Look at your physical body. What does it demand? Well, it demands certain types of food and certain types of rest and certain types of exercise and certain types of sensual experiences and so on and so forth. So, what are the obligations for this vehicle? I simply discharge them dispassionately without a personal investment. So the physical body has certain needs that need to be taken care of. That if they're not taken care of, you can't function properly. If you don't take care of the obligations to your car can't function properly. You can't drive properly. Your passage on the road is impeded. If you don't take care of your physical body, your passage through life is impeded. So what does this vehicle need? Understand that and discharge them. Anytime we take for the body more than what we need, it's the ego functioning. It goes beyond mere need and starts to get into desire. We're starting to cater to a want now. So we can distinguish the difference between needs and wants. The body needs certain things. The mind needs certain things. So too the intellect. Take care of those needs dispassionately. Vouchsafe your own personality that much sympathy as you would a complete stranger, no more, no less. So there's a story that I've heard Swamiji give when he discusses this idea. Something along the lines of, there's a great Swami living in the forest, and a family comes, I don't know, ambling through the forest for whatever reason. They come across the Swami and they recognize the great soul and they prostrate and so on and so forth. And as they're leaving, the father says, Maharaj, is there anything that we can do for you, anything that we can offer you? And he says, yes, you leave your daughter. Pardon? Leave your daughter. And yes, sir, he leaves the daughter. So the men, this is how everyone's face looks when we hear this story goes. Remember, it's a parable, all right? You don't have to be ideologically committed to anything, but just understand the principle behind it. So what he's basically saying is that he had that, the Swami had that dispassionate attitude towards his own physical body. The body needs certain things. It needs a female companion. Yeah, I need a female companion. You leave your daughter behind, please. Yes, sir. Okay. We're not advocating fathers giving away daughters to random strangers, okay? So leave lots of the negative potentials behind and just take the thread. The point that he's making is that he was able to ask that with complete dispassion because there was a recognition that the body needs that female companionship. So he asks for it and gets it. This is the attitude that we can strive for towards our own personality. And it's a beautiful way of avoiding both indulgence and suppression. Because suppression is that sort of false sense of renunciation. I don't need anything. I'm on a spiritual path. I'm giving up. Material wealth can't make me happy. Marriage won't make me happy. Children won't make me happy. And so I shun all of these things. But I haven't yet actually, that thought that these things won't make me happy, it's not a subjective reality for me yet. I know that that is the truth, or put it this way, I have faith that that is the truth. That material wealth, more and more I get, it's not going to make me happier. The relationships and family and career, they're not going to provide me with a lasting sense of satisfaction. I have faith that that is the truth, and I'm striving to achieve that. But I'm not there yet. At this point, I still need to prove myself in my career. I need companionship. I need a family. I need to make money. These are things that I actually do desire. So I'm going to work through my desires while at the same time striving towards that. What are my needs? Otherwise, I have some half-baked ideas that I've sort of digested partially and choose a life that is not mine. I choose a life that belongs to someone who is far more evolved than I am. That guy doesn't need career, family, money, popularity. He doesn't need those things. He genuinely has transcended them. He's grown above them. I haven't yet. I do need them. So if we have this ability to recognize the needs that we have by treating our own bodies, minds, and intellects as somebody else's. And that's a good example because, if someone comes to you that you know quite well, that you don't have a strong attachment for, and says, I started reading this book and I'm just wondering if I should get married or maybe I should just shun the whole thing. You can look at that guy and say, get married. Get married, trust me. Because you've seen him. Beautiful woman walks into the room and his attention is drawn, his vasanas there, he has the desire for it. So it's obvious he should. In fact, one of the things that Swamiji often talks about, he says, the fact that somebody comes and asks the question indicates that the answer is yes, get married. if you were genuinely above it, if you genuinely risen above that level of, the personality, then it wouldn't even arise. None of us stops and thinks, maybe I should get a new tricycle, or maybe I should. We don't stop and ask those questions. They're so far above them, it doesn't even come into the personality. The fact that the thought of companionship comes into the mind so often that he wrestles with it and plays with it and throws it around and juggles with it and maybe this, maybe that, that's the personality showing itself. But because I'm involved in my personality, I don't recognize that that's what's happening. I'm just playing with ideas here. Someone else can look at my personality from the outside, see what I'm going through, and then easily say, yes, you need that. So this is the state of objectivity that we can strive to reach for our own personalities. Okay, what needs, demands, desires do I have? How am I going to deal with them? No more, no less. So he says, banish the corroding ego, egocentric desires and attachments. Do not let the massive selfishness around you and about you influence your personality. So this is, again, talking about peer pressure. So this sort of is segueing from the previous section, survey your predecessors. This is something that comes up quite often, is that people often talk about this idea that the society at large is promoting the indiscriminate satisfaction of our egocentric desires. Certain communities and certain societies more than others, but there is this idea that you should satisfy your desires. You should satisfy, and everyone's doing it. Everyone's chasing. It's a kind of a scramble for the resources, as it were. Everyone wants to be the most popular. Everyone wants to be the whatever. He says, don't let that influence the personality. He says, get off the deadly hook of selfishness. So as with all of these things, this is good advice, but you can't give a should without a how. And so he gives the how in this last couple of lines. He says, learn to serve, sacrifice for the community at large. You would need to develop a strong intellect to combat and destroy the ego and its devastating tentacles. So the way to circumvent the selfish tendency of the mind is for the intellect to set an ideal. So an ideal is a goal that we set for ourselves that lies outside egocentric desires and attachments. The moment we are functioning towards the ideal, it's conscious thought force. You can't passively function towards an ideal. If we're passive, then we are we rest back into our current level of development. Now, everyone's somewhere between 0% and 100% development. It doesn't take any effort for us to be selfish. No one has to work to be selfish. It never happens. When we are putting in no effort, we just rest wherever we happen to be. And a person might be passively unselfish just because of the influence of their environment. I know someone who grew up in a family that always sort of gave to different charities and stuff. And she developed a sort of passive unselfishness. You just give. But there's no real conscious thought to step outside her own perspective, to step outside her own ego. There was just a habit had developed of sort of giving to charities. Now, it's a much better habit than stealing from the community, but it's still passive. It's not going to result in any growth. So growth is always an active, conscious activity. Thinking is conscious thought force. So a good analogy is if you are on the treadmill. You're at some level of physical development. You can sort of jog at 5, 6, 7 miles an hour with no effort. You can go for hours like that. You're not going to necessarily get any better. You'll maintain, but that's about it. if you want to improve your capacity, you run faster so that you have to actually put an effort to maintain it. And when the body says, I've had enough, let's get off, what do? Keep going. You push, and it's conscious effort to stay on there because the body is asking for you to get off, and the mind has had enough. The mind is asking you to get off, but your intellect says, well, I want to improve my physical capacities. I want to get better, so I'm going to consciously choose to stay here in the face of the demands of my body and my mind. Now, you can take it too far, get involved in the whole thing and keep running and injure yourself. But there is that sweet spot, there's that window where you push yourself, it's a comfortable stretch, and you improve your capacity. So with this, when we set the ideal, there is that conscious effort, that conscious thought force to sustain and maintain it. So when the attention is directed towards the ideal, we've, as I say, circumvented the selfish tendency of the mind. You've short-circuited it. And the longer and the more we can maintain our identification with the ideal, we grow into that new level. The fundamental law that governs our growth as individuals is, as you think, so you become. You are what you eat. Your personality is the thoughts, desires, and feelings that it has entertained from this point as far back as you wish to conceive. The sum total of all of the thoughts, all of the desires, all of the feelings, and all the actions that we've triggered, that we've executed, that determines the personality that we have. And so, as I says, the intellect needs to be developed to combat and destroy the ego. It's the intellect which maintains that thought, maintains that awareness. Okay, he continues. Volunteer for reading.
Oh, no, I'm looking at you, dear.
Scrutinize your person. 3 types of living species in the world are the plant, animal, and human. Each species has a distinct and different character. A plant has movement within itself but cannot move from one place to another. A rose plant will die if it has no water at its roots. There may be a pond of water a few meters away, but the plant cannot help itself. Animals enjoy more mobility and freedom than plants, yet they are very much dependent upon the world. A tiger cannot turn vegetarian if there is no game in the forest. Neither can a cow become a flesh eater if it is denied fodder. However, birds and fishes are known to migrate thousands of miles to seek food and shelter. Nevertheless, the freedom of animals is restricted, confined to certain levels. In contrast to the 2 species, humans alone are designed to be totally self-sufficient. With the use of the intellect, they can combat and overcome the worst challenges of nature confronting them. Ironically, with the lack of development of the intellect, humans have become helpless victims of the external world, and they are infested with sorrow and suffering even more than the other species.
Ironic.
Yeah.
So, at the beginning of the Vedanta Treatise, in chapter 1, he has this. I come back to this so often, I should get a big board made of it actually and carry it around with me. But it's a very simple looking graph of human development. On the left hand side, human development from 0% to 100%, from bottom to top. And on the right hand side, dependence upon the world. 100% at the bottom, 0% at the top. So he talks about our growth as human beings as being commensurate with our dependence upon the external world. So all that a plant basically does is subsist, it lives and maintains its physical existence. Right? A plant doesn't have an internal life. So the plant's existence is completely dependent upon the external world. as he says, if there's no water at the roots, the plant dies. There might be a pond so close that, but there's nothing that the rose bush can do. It will die. Okay, it can try to reach out tentacles, but if it doesn't get there, it doesn't get there. So animals have physical body and they have an internal life as well, despite what the UK government is currently saying. So there is this this idea that you have a plant, you build upon what a plant has and you add something else. You get an animal. You have a physical body that is matched with an internal aspect as well, mind, and what we call a rudimentary gross intellect. The dog can distinguish between dirt, food, master, stranger. So the animal then has physical existence and it has an emotional existence as well. So it says animals are more free, they have more mobility than plants. They can migrate, if they're hungry, they go looking for food. So they're still very much constrained. He says an animal can't function outside of its nature. It's fixed. So if you're a vegetarian, if you're a cow, you're a cow. You're a vegetarian. Right? There's no capacity in the animal to make a decision to become a meat eater. No decision for the tiger to become a vegetarian. It doesn't happen. It doesn't have that capacity. It's constrained and restricted by its nature. Human beings have the physical body, they have the emotional life, and they also have the intellectual life. Again, something else has been added. So with the intellectual life, he says, overcome the worst challenges of nature confronting them. So we can, live in environments that would otherwise be inhospitable for life by harnessing the power and the function and the laws of nature. We can travel great distances across the globe to other, celestial bodies. He says the presence of the intellect allows us to gain what he calls absolute freedom. The worst challenges of nature confronting them. So when you look at the dependence of a human being, when we are at a low level of development, we are dependent upon the external world for the fulfillment of our life. Now, the fulfillment of our life is to have a fulfilled physical, emotional, and intellectual life. And what we've been discussing already is that sense of freedom, that sense of peace and well-being. To the extent that we develop ourselves, that sense of well-being becomes independent of the external world. So someone who is 0% developed it's really only theoretical. I was asking this earlier on to Synology when she was here, and I've heard Swami say the same thing. The idea of someone who's 100% selfish, such a person doesn't exist. Even animals are not 100% selfish. Even their nature is fixed in such a way as to have, what do they call it? Altruism, mirror neurons, is it? Something like this. Their fellow species someone from their fellow species is suffering, they also go through that same degree of suffering. There's some natural empathy, even in primates that are quote unquote still animals. So 100% selfish person doesn't exist. But from a theoretical perspective, that person is 100% dependent upon the world for their sense of satisfaction. This would be the state of hell, because the world is going to be constantly changing. The satisfaction that person experiences is always going to be violated. It's always going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Thwarted. Because the world's never going to fully cater to all of that person's desires. So they're always going to be in misery. As we liberate ourselves from desires, the sense of satisfaction naturally arises from within. So a person who is 100% developed has 0% dependency upon the external world. It's exactly what we were talking about earlier with that sense of true happiness. So he says, we have the capacity to become totally self-sufficient. The reason that we have this capacity is because of the presence of the intellect. That's what allows us to rise above the demands of the mind. That ability for self-transcendence. You can't transcend a limitation or a boundary unless you can conceive of that first. You can't take yourself to a place that you can't conceive of. So the conception of something beyond my current level of development is essential in getting there. That's the intellectual side. And as we were touching on earlier, there's also that degree of faith. Because the personality, put it this way, the 10-year-old has never experienced what it's like to be a mature 28-year-old. He can see people who are 28. His brothers or his cousins might be 28 years old. You can see them functioning in that way, but he has never personally experienced himself. His mind has never subjectively touched that. So too when we conceive of spiritual development, a higher level of maturity. The first thing is to conceive it, but we've never been there. We don't know what that is like. We can imagine what it would be like, but we have to recognize we're going to be imagining it wrongly or poorly. Our imagination of what that greater degree of development is like would be a sort of faded facsimile or a two-dimensional picture of something that is actually three-dimensional. We've got to recognize that, and that's where the faith comes in. I don't know what it is, but I believe that it's there. And so the conception of it intellectually and the faith, they come together. There's that confluence. So as we talked about, faith is a belief in a thing I do not know until I come to know what I believe. And the VT, he has that quote. He says, true devotion is faith in good rather than faith in God. Faith in God means what? Some old man up in the clouds. Some person who created the universe. A deist or a theist. It doesn't make any sense. It's not practical. But it is practical to have faith in good. To conceive of and to desire a higher level of development. And so we can understand it by looking at our previous lives, our previous life, our earliest stages of development. When we were a child, when we were a teenager, when we were whatever, we recognise that there were dependencies on a family unit, on parents, dependencies upon being part of the popular group, dependencies upon all of these other hang-ups that we had. And you get to a point where these things just don't matter anymore. You can recognise the degree of freedom that you've gained by just dropping those things. Where am I now? What are the things that I am dependent upon? What are my attachments? And then in the same way that you've leapt from childhood to where I am now, conceive again where I am now to somewhere else. So we can start to imagine that state of greater freedom and start to desire it. So the mind and intellect both participate. And there is, as I say, that confluence towards the goal. And it's maintaining that thought. It's the constancy of thought that has the effect on the personality. And that's, he doesn't talk about it here, I don't think, but that's where the three yogas come in. So the three spiritual disciplines are designed so that when we are acting, when we are feeling, and when we are thinking, we can direct those activities towards the ideal that we've set for ourselves, so that we can most constantly maintain that ideal. Action is by far the most practical one. Every environment that we go into, we can be looking, scanning. Is there anything I can do? Is there anything I can offer? What does this environment need? You know, a friend of yours is holding a birthday celebration at her house. So you go a couple of hours early, for whatever reason. First thing you do when you walk through the door, do you need any help? We don't need anything. No, we're good. We're fine. Okay, even if you're told that, Okay, you're sitting, flicking through the channels, or you're reading a book or whatever there. Your mind's always just thinking, is there anything I can do to help organise this before people get here? You see someone carrying a box, you think, does he need help? Oh, no, he's got one box, it's fine. The mind's always just looking, just searching for something that it can offer. Every environment that we go into, we can do this. It doesn't matter whether it's a work, social, kids' basketball game, class, whatever it is, there's always something that we can do. Sorry, there's always that thought, is there something that I can do? Sometimes there's nothing we can do. Sometimes the answer is, no, everything's basic, there's nothing I can offer here. Okay, just don't get in people's way, I suppose. Sit back and try not to make too much disturbance. That I can do. Can you stop being a pain? Yeah, I can do that. Give me a book. So that I can do. I'm very good at that. So that thought, if we constantly maintain it, is taking us towards the ideal. So there's that beautiful line at the end of John Milton's poem on his blindness. He also serves who only stands and waits. I'm not doing anything, but I'm standing and waiting for an opportunity to execute my desire to serve. That's why he says in the previous paragraph, get off the deadly hook of selfishness, learn to serve, sacrifice for the community at large. So that is the most practical way for us to express this desire for our own growth. Every person that I meet, what's this person's temperament? What do they need? Not what do they want. Like, don't conflate those two things, but what does this person need? What can I offer? What does this group need? What does this environment, what does the situation need? And, think small, think large. This situation could be what? My political situation. This situation could be what? The globe, the entire planet. What does this situation need? Think about it, and then discharge what you can. So this is the method of getting to that stage of self-sufficiency. Because the moment we think in terms outside of our own ego, the ego is being degraded. Okay. Any questions before we finish off?